Welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Listen up, family. This one's going to hit you right in the soul. Today on the show, we've got a man who went from living the dream to losing everything, and somehow came out the other side stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever. His name is Michael Bugary, former UC Berkeley star, Boston Red Sox prospect, and the author of the raw, no-holds-barred book, The Disease of Me, How Losing My Professional Baseball Career, Drug Addiction, and Brain Cancer Saved My Life. At 23 years old, Michael watched his entire identity shatter with one career-ending arm injury. What followed was a brutal spiral into depression, heroin, and a malignant brain tumor the size of a tennis ball sitting in his cerebellum. Multiple brain surgeries, months of chemo and radiation that left him physically broken, mentally crushed, and spiritually empty. But here's the part that's going to wreck you in the best way. Michael didn't just survive, he learned how to live. Through the darkest nights of isolation, addiction, and unbearable pain, he discovered that suffering is a choice we make when we stay trapped in our own minds. He found honesty, personal responsibility, exercise, meditation, faith, and the power of helping others. Today, he's a motivational speaker who proves that the very things that almost killed him, sports, addiction, and cancer, can become the greatest teachers of all. Michael, brother, welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast. This is going to be heavy. This is going to be real, and this is going to be the kind of conversation that changes lives. Welcome in, brother.
Thanks, Jimmy. I appreciate it. That's probably the best introduction I ever got. So thank you for that. I got to bring you with me,
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. Get up there and, I can be your opener for you. So, before we start, right, quick one to the family, right?
Yeah.
Our guest basically for guys in Boston, right, is the real life Sam Mayday Malone, right, from Cheers. Red Sox guy, just like Sam, except while Sam was chasing skirts, right, and pouring beers, Mike was chasing his baseball dreams, then heroin and a brain tumor the size of a tennis ball, and still crushing the ultimate comeback. Sam Malone can only wish he has the balls that Michael does. So let's go, Mike. You ready?
Yeah. I was chasing skirts too. I'm gonna put that in there too. So that was my big problem.
You got
Yeah.
You must have been playing at UC Berkeley, right? And then with the Sox organization, you must have had a lot of fun doing that. But at 23, right, you're living every kid's dream, right? UC Berkeley, then the Boston Sox, right?
Yeah.
When that career-ending arm injury hit, what did it feel like at the exact moment you realized baseball and your entire identity was now gone?
Yeah, I think it hit. Then it hit so much when I got released and my arm wasn't right. I think when it really hit is when I got all these second opinions done and the doctors didn't have any answers for me really. And I was basically told that I probably wouldn't throw right again because I could physically throw, but it just wasn't right. My velocity was the speed on my pitch was down about 10 to 15 miles an hour. And so I just wasn't the same pitcher. And when I learned that I can't ever do that again, maybe that I was lost. I really was. I didn't think about a life afterwards. I didn't think about a post sports career. I didn't think about any of that. I invested everything into that. Looking back on it, I had this overwhelming need to be great, but I was never willing to do the things necessary to be truly great.
So what was it like, right, growing up? You're probably a star, right, playing ball.
Yeah.
And where'd you go to high school? Where'd you play in high school?
Monterey High School.
Okay.
And in Central California. Yeah. I went to a different high school at first, and that was the time where I started to fall in love with baseball. It was my sophomore year, and then baseball became like it was something to fill that hole inside me. I had that feeling where I didn't quite fit in. I wasn't as popular or as cool as I thought with the other kids as I thought I was, and I was looking for something to kind of fill that hole. And baseball became that, and I put a lot into it. And at that time, it was a moment where I was one of the best players on the JV team, and then I thought I was a shoo-in to be a varsity player, and the coach told me that I was going to be on JV again. And that moment, I think, after I'd worked so hard and after I'd had such a good year, at that moment, I told myself that I don't care what anybody says about me. You can say whatever you want, but nobody's going to tell me that I'm not good enough again. And that's when baseball kind of turned into my identity. And I transferred high schools, Monterey High School, at a better baseball school. And I just joined an academy, and then just, begged my parents to get extra lessons. And I started to really just completely invest myself into that because I put myself worth in as to that. And so baseball just became me.
Yeah, baseball became Michael, right?
Yeah.
So what were you throwing, right? How fast were you throwing in high school?
So I was around 90 left-hander. Yeah, I was high 80s, low 90s around there. Yeah, but
How
I
was the
was
curveball looking?
oh great. I was my changeup was my best pitch. I love pitching and I was just really good at, I was it was like an art form to me and I was just really good at, changing speeds and striking people out. I just that was it was something that I really loved. I really at an early age understood the game within the game of pitching, and I turned into a very talented hitter, but pitching was what I wanted to do because I also like the attention of having the ball and all eyes on me and in that pressure situations.
Yeah. So what were you drafted by the Sox?
Yes, I was drafted out, yeah, 15th round. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, my junior
And
my
what
junior
what did
season.
that feel like, right? What'd that feel like when you were drafted by them?
I mean, it was great too, but I think I have this disease of more, right? Where it doesn't matter what I get, I need more. Like it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And I got hurt my first couple years, so I had this breakout year my junior year, and I ended up getting drafted. But I thought I was going to get drafted a lot higher. So I was actually as happy as I was to get drafted. I was a little disappointed into where I was drafted at. Because I didn't have an agent, I didn't have all I just came out kinda sprouted back out of nowhere, and so, yes, it was a bittersweet moment, I guess. It was yes, I was happy to get drafted, especially by a team like the Red Sox, but also I was frustrated. I remember throwing my computer because I thought I was gonna get drafted higher, when I was looking at it, so
Yeah. So do they give you a call when they draft you, and who
yeah,
calls you?
yeah. The scout called me, and he ended up coming to my house and meeting with my parents, and we signed the contract. It was kind of a cool experience.
Yeah. And what was you like, what was your first time, stepping on the field, in spring training, going to training camp? What was that like?
Oh, yeah, it was different. I think there's a misconception, and I kinda knew, but when you're at that level now you're competing with the world, it's not just like college anymore. Now you got all these people from the Latin countries and Asia, and it's a whole different experience. And I wish that, I didn't take it as seriously as I should have. I kinda treated it, and that's how I am, because I'm always caught up in the distractions.
Yeah.
I'm so focused on feeling better now, and however that may be, just enjoying that experience. I don't think about the consequences of my actions or the future. When I got there, I had to realize that I was no longer a player on a team anymore, right? I was an employee. I was an investment, and so I can't get away with the going out and those kind of things because all eyes are on you and they watch everything that you do. And I just didn't quite understand that because I was so focused on, hey, I got to show everybody what a cool guy I am by womanizing or going out after games and I had an addiction to Adderall at the time that I didn't understand a lot about how that
Yeah.
worked, and that affected me greatly, and so there was just so many things going on that I had just so many distractions in my head that I wasn't ready for, it's that next step up, and the same thing happened to me when I got to college too. At
Yeah.
that point, at those levels, physical talent is not it's even now, right? There's the even playing field, so it's all the other little things, like when I got to college, it's like, how do you live on your own and you show up on time and do all the extra things? And it's all the little things outside. For me, it was never just the physical talent. The physical talent was there. It was never just the competing. I would never felt overmatched by anybody that I played against ever physically. But it was all the other things that's what took me down. Really, it did. I didn't
Yeah.
because I always just try to keep up this identity as a baseball player by drinking and partying or whatever it may. I didn't focus on the little. I didn't get a summer job, or I didn't learn how to manage my checkbook, or I didn't learn how to do confrontations. I didn't learn how to do any of these things. All I just did focus on was the physicality of the game, and that really hurt me. It really hurt me when I had to face real life. Because when you get to that level, it's real life now. It's a job.
Yeah, and I love what you said, right? Because I don't think many people do get that when you do make it to the pros, right? You are just an employee at that point, right? And,
Yeah,
and you are almost an investment, right? People don't think of that. People just think, people walk into, you walk into Fenway, you're on the team, right? And you're getting a couple $1,000,000 a year per se. Now it's crazy the contracts that guys get, but
yeah,
it's also, and you put it into perspective, right? And people think these guys get way too much money, right? But think about what the owners,
yeah.
right? You're talking about $1 billion franchises now. So, what was it like? Were there any guys when you walked into spring training that you were, a little bit starstruck from?
Yeah, I mean, a few times, but I gue I guess not really at that time. When you play at that level, when you play around these kind of guys, it's you don't feel that way. More of like a comparison thing, like I compare myself,
Yeah.
right? Right. I think you have to have a sense of denial, right? The denial meaning like I have to believe that I'm the best player there, right? I have to believe that I am, right? Because however that may seem, I have to believe that because it's such a small window, and like I said, as the physicality becomes an even playing field, it's that's what separates you. So, I never got that way. I think I stopped being like a fan after playing with some really elite teams, and I think a big thing too with me, I didn't get a really a chance to play that long either. Like I got hurt so young, and I got hurt just in my second season, so I didn't really get to be around a lot of the guys that I felt I should have been talent wise. So it was limited in that experience.
Yeah. And what was what ended up being the ending, the injury that ended your career?
So I had
To Tommy John's?
No, no, I had bone spurs, which was a very standard, like, procedure that a lot of guys have in their elbow, where I just had some, floating bones in my tendons and whatever. They just go in and clean it up and it's done, but I think the surgery was a little bit more complicated when they went in there. They had to take out more bone than they realized, and I think that affected me too. But also, and I have to say this, is that, I didn't take my rehab as seriously as I should have been. I was abusing my medication, and I was out partying, and I was pulling all-nighters, and I was miserable. At that time when I got hurt, my dad had went through a major heart attack in California, it happened like around the same time as I got hurt, and I didn't my dad one of the first things my dad said was, "Don't let Michael come home." And he didn't say that because he didn't want to see me. He said that because he thought I was out there pursuing my dream, and I didn't have the heart to tell them that I had gotten hurt. So my family really rallied around my dad, which is what I'm glad they did, but I was kinda stuck alone in that, and I was really having a hard time with this injury and with that, and what I turned to when I need a solution, I turn to whatever's available to me that's outside of myself, and at that time was my medication, or it was booze and chasing girls and things. I did a lot of damage to my arm with my rehab and the way that I did things. I think for a long time I was angry with the Red Sox for releasing me. I was angry for ruining my arm in this, but I had to come to that conclusion that was me and my actions that did that. So it was a hard time for me in that year that I got hurt.
So what's it like when you do get that call, right? To tell you that you cut? How do you feel in that moment?
That I'm cut. Is that what you said? Yeah, yeah. Actually, they bring you into the office. They bring you into the office, and the head guy, the head of minor league operations, or whoever's there, they tell you that it's. I don't know. They told me I thought that they would give me more time because they just paid for my surgery and just let me go right away. But you know what? It could have been one of those things where hey, they don't want to deal with this guy who likes to do all his extracurricular stuff. He's not taking his stuff seriously, and so we're not going to give him more time. And I didn't realize at the time, and I held a resentment. It's hard to hear that. It's hard to hear that we're releasing you. I mean, it's hard to hear that rejection or in any capacity, right? No matter where you are, and I think especially at that time, especially so early on, I didn't know how to handle it, and I took it the best that I could, and I sucked it up, and I left. But I definitely had built that resentment into my mind where I was going to prove them wrong. All right, I was going to show them how they made a mistake, and usually in the past that always has worked for me. That motivation, but this time just had no ability to throw again because my arm was just so messed up.
Was so junky at that point. Yeah. So you said, right, you lost your sense of self-worth overnight, right? Walk
Yeah,
us through that darkness. How does a
yeah,
young man who had everything, right, suddenly feel like nothing?
yeah. I think, I'd like to say that, and I speak to a lot of people now. I speak to addicts and I speak to athletes and schools and things. And I have to say this, I'd like to put a fancy little ribbon on my story and to tell you that I was this promising athlete, that I had this bright future, and I suffered this devastating arm injury, and I was introduced to painkillers, to Oxycontin after my surgery, and that's why I became an addict. I like to think that that's a good story, and I wish it was the truth, but it wasn't. I had always experimented with things and tried things, and so I knew exactly what those painkillers were gonna do to me, and I just didn't care anymore. So without having baseball in my life, it was my higher power. What do you do when you feel like you lost, God or something? I become broken on the inside. And see, I had made it in a point that, like I mentioned to you earlier, when that coach told me that I wasn't good enough, that I made it to a point to be loud and abrasive, cocky, and with how good I was, and I made it that way. So I made it sure that everybody knew me for baseball. So if ever I went out in my hometown, or if ever I went out, people would always ask me about baseball. If ever I saw. Now that I lost it, I just felt such shame, and I didn't wanna talk about it anymore. I didn't wanna tell people I got hurt. I didn't wanna talk about my future. I didn't wanna talk about any of those things because it just overnight, right? I went from drafted to a year later to this, and so to never being thrown right. So a year ago, I was talking, having all these positive talks, and now I can't say that. So what I really wanted to do is I wanted to be alone, and I didn't wanna feel. That's what I wanted, and painkillers, if nothing else, they do that. They do that for you. They help you numb your feelings, and they help you to be alone, They stop this, because I just wanted to stop this from
Yeah.
and that's what happened, I felt that was my solution.
Yeah, taking those painkillers, right? Because we had a, issue, still do here in Boston, but, when I was growing up, I'm 41, so I had a lot of friends, that went down that road, and I tried them myself, and the way I can explain it is for 4 to 5 hours, 4 to 6 hours, it takes you away from the world and any care and any worry, right? But it's definitely not the, solution to when you're going through so much and you're having problems, you know?
No,
But it
just
was
b
huge.
it
I
it
lost my best friend,
yeah. No,
21 years old from a heroin overdose.
yeah, it buries the problem, and it masks it,
Yeah.
hides it, and it makes it worse, it really does. It buries it and it causes it to, like, to build up, and the more that you do that, the more that you're not thinking right, and then the blame comes in, and then, it's yeah, it's just a slippery slope, and it's
Yeah.
dangerous.
Was there ever one specific moment, right, when you knew you had crossed the line from coping, right, to being cut to full blown addiction?
Yeah, so I went right after I was still I think there was still a big part of me inside that couldn't accept a life without baseball, right? I couldn't accept it. So, I think there's a part of me that also knew it too, right? That my arm wasn't right because I could feel it, and I chose to ignore that. So I went on this, like, cycle these cycles of insanity of, like, "Hey, I found this motivation to I'm gonna prove these doctors wrong. I'm gonna prove these coaches wrong." And I would train, I would work out, I would set up a scrimmage to where I'd pitch in front of scouts, and, I set it up, like, 4 months out, and then I'd work out and train, and then I start throwing again, and then I get hurt again. Then I go back onto opiates. Right? Then I would go back for a while. And then after a few months, or I'd find that motivation again and do the same thing, and then get hurt again. And every single time this happened, I started to do the drugs a little bit differently. I learned how to smoke them the next time, right? Because every time I go back out and relapse, I start to do things differently. Then they stopped making OxyContin. Now heroin is cheaper and is better. Right. So then the heroin. So once after a few of those cycles, once a drug like heroin enters your life, you no longer have the capacity to think about anything else. So at this time too, I'm living up this dual life, right? I'm teaching lessons. I'm out in public, and I'm kind of trying to pretending to be like, that baseball player, or trying to the best that I can. But in private, I'm just hollow and empty, and I'm using. I think, when I said earlier I didn't want to be out in public, I could be out in public if I was high because I didn't care. But
Yeah.
or abusing Adderall and opiates, I could do that. I could create this agenda. But then when heroin enters, I just no longer cared anymore, and my family started to take notice, and I had an intervention, and I was sent to treatment center at that time. But I think that was a time right when heroin got into it where I realized, I may have a problem, and but still, I really wasn't ready to accept it, and I really wasn't ready to go to this treatment center and be honest. I wasn't willing to admit that I ruined my arm, right? I wasn't willing to admit I wasn't willing to say that. I wasn't willing to admit that I was using heroin. I told them I was just using pills. It's those lies, those secrets that keep you sick, and that's how my first thing at treatment went. So, honestly, not until brain cancer, about a year after brain cancer, that I realized, that baseball was over, and I really do need to change.
Yeah. So that leads me to the question, right? So what was the lowest point in your addiction, right, that still haunts you when you think about it today?
Yeah. The lowest point is for me was right after my treatment, right after the chemotherapy and the radiation, and after the multiple brain surgeries. I just 2 weeks after I learned that I was cancer free, my mom found me passed out in my car, with drug paraphernalia on my lap, most likely thinking I was dead. And because I needed something for something, I was in pain, and I needed it. Like, my mom had told the doctors that I was an opiate addict, so they weren't giving me a lot of things, and I was in so much pain. I had to go see my dealer. And after that happened, when my mom realized that I wasn't dead, and she berated me a little bit. But then, she left. I had a girlfriend at the time. She left, and so I'm alone. And I remember, a couple months into it, binging on it, I started to quit on my own and try to detox and try to turn things around. But I had lost all my hair. So I from chemotherapy, so I had this peach fuzz, on my head, and my face was sucked in, and cheekbones pronounced because of all the weight that I lost, and I had this yellow tint to the skin around my eyes, and my eyes were hollow. And I see that image sometimes, in the mirror when I look now, and I have to remember that because that's the lowest point, my lowest point. But that was the moment where I remember lying on my couch like that, just crying, in such pain from withdrawal and from the side effects. And I remember telling myself, "This is what rock bottom must be like." So, you know, that moment, but I guess you only hit bottom when you stop digging, right? So it wasn't my bottom yet, but that moment is so vivid to me because I was physically and mentally had just been broken, and I have to remember that image because that's just it tells me where I've been and what I could be tomorrow if I choose to use again.
Yeah. So the cancer, right? The cancer diagnosis, right? So what did the doctor say to you, right? Do you remember in the room? And what was going through your mind at that point? You had a brain cancer diagnosis, right? A
Yeah,
tumor slightly smaller than a tennis ball in your cerebellum.
yeah. Yeah, so after I got out of that treatment center that we were talking about, I decided to stay. I was in Arizona, so I decided to stay in Arizona, and you know, I got fell back into some old habits, and I was living the way that I once was, and I managed to turn some things around. But yeah, then I started to experience these headaches out of nowhere, and debilitating headaches where I was sensitive to light, and I felt like I would pass out. I would nod off, couldn't wake up, and it was just the tumor was just shooting so big. And so when I got to the emergency room, they put me right in, and they got me into MRI, and then diagnosed me right away. And this is what I remember the most vividly is my mom had just flown in from California, so she was sitting in the hospital bed chair next to me. I'm sitting in the bed, and the doctor's talking in front of me, and he's writing on his whiteboard all the percentages that I have for my treatments, how rare the tumor is, what we got to do for this. And, in his monotone doctor talk, right. That I'm sure you can tell that he's delivered bad news a lot of times. And so he's talking this way. And, I don't, I'm not turning to my mom and wondering what she's going through, right? She had just put me through rehab, and she had now had brain cancer. What must be going on in her mind? I wasn't even listening to the doctor. I was just hearing things. All I was thinking about was, "Hey, I'm gonna get some good drugs now here, right? And I don't have to work for them. So, what, just give me a stick, and I'll bite down on it, and let's do it." I wasn't praying to God. I was indifferent because at that point, without baseball in my life, I didn't care if I lived or died. My ego was too big to do it myself, but I didn't care. So I was just like, give me some drugs, and let's get it on. That was my mindset.
Yeah. And what's mom saying at this point?
Yeah, I mean, what can she say? I mean, I guess she's just praying to God or whatever she's got to do to, like, hopefully her son lives. And but then again, I'll break her heart again. A couple months later when she finds me passed out. So I think I just broke her heart so many times. It got to a point for her where I stole so much hope from her. And you get numbed after that after a while.
Yeah, and that's what drugs, right, and addiction will do to people. They turn them into a complete monster. And when you're in it, right, I've experienced in my life with family members, and I had an aunt that passed away from a drug overdose. And under it all, right, and I can say it is that most addicts that I know, right, they're good people. They're just caught
Yeah,
up in a cycle, an unending cycle that I had friends that were on heroin, and they would explain it to me that, we don't even take it anymore, years ago, we don't even take it anymore to get high. We just take it to feel normal, right? So
yeah,
we can actually just get out of bed and move. And, so, you've spoken, right, many times about the prison of your own mind, right?
yeah.
What did that isolation feel like? And how did it keep you from asking for help?
Yeah. Isolation is a mindset, right? It's not necessarily being alone, right? Isolation, you can be isolated around, tons of other people. But I
Yeah.
think for me, isolation was, I'm this big tough guy. I'm into Berkeley. I have all this, I'm the this pro athlete, I'm not like these other people in addiction. I'm not like I didn't drink under a bridge. I have a problem, sure, but that it's terminal uniqueness, right? Hey, if this happened to you, maybe if you were on the cusp of greatness, if you're on the cusp of being pitching for the Red Sox and if all this other thing, maybe you would get high too if you lost all that, right? It's me seeing that I'm bigger and my story, the world revolves around me. That's isolation, right? Isolation is me thinking that, my story is better than other people. My problem is different than yours. And it's looking for the differences and not the similarities. And so When
Yeah.
I do that, then I don't turn to anybody else for answers. Then I don't ask for help. Then I don't look to a power greater than myself, right? And that's what happens. That I'm driving the ship, and whenever I drive the ship, it crashes magnificently. That's isolation to me. Isolation is that's the prison of my own mind. It's that internal feedback loop that I have where I create outcomes before they happen, right? I create.
Yeah.
I don't need to go talk to them because I already know what's going to happen when I don't know, right? So I already know what they're gonna say, so I don't do it. Or I already know what's and so when I create that in my own mind, then that's isolation.
So you mentioned, right, that stories of other people overcoming adversity saved your life more than anything else, right? Was there one particular story, a person that lit the first spark for you?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a good question, and I read about it in my book. I had brain tumor that I had was a brain tumor of the central nervous system. So all the treatment, all the treatment that I got, the side effects were just devastating nerve pain all over, and I didn't know how to manage that pain. Managing my pain is a huge thing for me because when I'm in uncontrollable pain, I only think about myself, and that pain can be psychological or it can be physical. For me, it was both, but this physical pain that I was in all the time, it was bothering me so much where I had hypersensitivity in my toes, I had hypersensitivity in my fingers, peripheral neuropathy, and so also hypersensitivity and numbness to where I couldn't really walk or no had any spatial awareness. My front shin muscles were numb, and so I went from this pro athlete to like decrepit overnight, and I didn't know how to handle that. And the type of tumor that I had so rare in adults. It's common in more common in children, and that's why I do the work that I do now with my therapy dog at the hospitals. But it was so I couldn't go on the internet and be like, hey, 27-year-old male, former athlete who had a medulloblastoma, what were some, I couldn't find anybody like that. So, right, in my desperation to be unique, God had to make me really unique, right? That's the irony of the whole
Yeah.
story, right? And not in a good way, not the way that I hoped, right? But I couldn't find that. The only thing I could find was, kids who had it that grew up through it and got through it. But so I didn't have anybody to turn to for answers, and doctors didn't really know. They were just trying to save my life. They didn't know what the treatment was going to do. So I started to read and to learn things, and I got into meditation a little bit was given some advice. And I heard a story of Dr. Joe Dispenza. He writes books. He wrote a book called Evolve Your Brain, and he talked about an injury that he had and about in his back, and how he chose not to take the doctor's advice. He chose to do it on his own, in a way where he would use his mind to visualize and recreate his spine, and he did some really cool unique things, and that kind of sparked my interest, maybe that I can heal my nerve pain in the same way. Then I learned a little bit about phantom limbs and how when somebody loses an arm or a leg, they can still feel the nerve signals in that
Yeah.
area. And I thought maybe what I can do meditation, and I could rebuild my nerves and do it in that way creatively. And I did that. And I think before any of that, before I was willing to listen, I had to take personal responsibility. Right. So,
Yeah.
so for me to be able to listen to the stories of other people and for me to apply them, I have to get to the point where I realize, hey, you know what? All these bad things that happen to me, they are my fault. I have to accept that. It doesn't not mean that I approve of it. It just means that I have to acknowledge that that's how it happened, and I can't change it. I can only do better in the future. Because then when I'm able to accept that, then I can turn to other people for answers. So yeah, there's a few more stories. The story of Marcus Dupree and about I don't know if you ever seen that 30 for 30. There's a few other great examples. Dan Arley, he writes the book Predictably Irrational. His story helped me. There's so many stories of people that went through unique things and how they handled them. And that's a beauty thing about stories is that they're all different. We all go through them, but how we handle them, and that pain, it's all relative. It's all the same. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just mentioned it, right? You had to learn radical honesty and personal responsibility, right? What's the hottest truth you had to admit to yourself about the man you used to be?
Ooh, I mean, I think the hardest thing I have to really understand is that I love attention and I like to get high and avoid my problems. And that's who I am, and that's who I will always be. I would rather, get messed up and not deal with it. And I'm still that way. I can do that I have this need for more. I can do it with anything. I can do it with food. I can do it with video games. I can do it with the internet. I can do it with all these things. I can just fill that hole inside me. But the only way, and that need for more is infinite. But the only way that I can fill that is with God, right? Because God is infinite. So for my higher power. But yeah, and I had to come to the realization that I caused my own brain cancer. right? So in my desperation to fix my arm, I went out and got human growth hormone and other anabolic steroids from a shady source, and I used them without any medical supervision, obviously misusing them, overusing them, and that's most likely what caused my brain tumor. So coming to that realization that I did that was difficult. Coming to the realization that I ruined my arm by my behavior, coming to the that was all my fault. I think those are all really hard things. How do you reconcile that with yourself, and to know that your dream and everything you put everything into, it was your fault for bringing it down. So that was
Yeah.
challenging, but you know what? I also see it now from a different perspective of what I've gained from all that. So that's even more powerful to me. So I don't really even think about, to
Yeah.
be honest, what that anymore.
Yeah, everything you've gone through and, everything you've seen and been through, you know, you can look back now and say, it was a cause of me, right? It was me. Oftentimes I think people love to point the finger at everybody else but themselves, right?
Yeah.
Until you really look in the mirror and take stock in your life and where you're going and what you want to achieve and what you want to accomplish in life, right?
Yeah. Well, blame and
So
anger is so much easier than responsibility, right? You know?
no
It's so
doubt
much
about it.
it's so
No
much
doubt about
easier.
it.
Yeah. And that's why I call it
Yeah.
the disease of me, 'cause I am and I
Yeah.
will always be the problem, right? The drugs and alcohol, they're a symptom, right? I don't have a drug problem, I have a Michael problem, right? And until I
Yeah.
accept that, then I can do something about it, right? I don't have to
Yeah.
live that way anymore. I can acknowledge it. It's a way that I think, and I still think that way sometimes, My thinking's messed up, and that's okay, but I don't have to act upon it. Right? So,
Yeah.
and I can change my behaviors, and that helps me.
So how long have you been sober now?
I'll have 5 years April 1st.
Wow, April 1st. That's my mom, God rest my mother. She's been dead a couple years now, but April 1st, 5 years.
Sorry.
Wow.
Thank you. Sorry to
So,
hear about you.
you've said, right? You said suffering is a choice we make when we stay trapped in isolation, right? For someone listening right now who feels completely alone in their pain, what would you say to them?
I'd say get out and help somebody else, right? Whether that may be however that may look, help your neighbor mow their grass, or do what, or go out and volunteer at a dog shelter, or go you volunteer at a hospital. Get something outside of yourself, because what that will do, and that's hard to do. When you're in isolation, when you're depressed, and that you're so caught up in you, and it's hard to do that. But when you get out there and see other people and see the plight of other people, you realize that your problems are not that big, right? And
Yeah.
that your pain and what everyone is going through is the same. Because when you get caught up in that uniqueness and that isolation, you think that your problems are so much bigger than everybody else's, but and it's so far from the truth. We're all, as part of the human condition, right? We all are going through something inside of us, some invisible condition that you can't see. And when you're out there and when you're communicating and you're doing things for people, you just really see the world as it is, and it changes you, and you feel so much better, because helping other people helps you the most. Helping other people helps me the most, and that's the biggest thing for me today. Now, when I'm starting to feel that way and I'm getting caught into my own mind, I have to put myself out there, and I get it. That's not easy, but that's the best thing I can say.
Yeah. So how did rebuilding, right, your relationship with God change everything for you?
Yeah, I mean, once I realized that I don't know much, and I've been wrong about everything, it was like a huge burden off me, right? For me, it was hard, because I grew up going to church, and I'm not particularly religious in a lot of ways, and I think I blame God for a lot of the stuff. I was angry at God. I was angry for the ending my dream, and because I felt like that was my purpose, and then the brain cancer, then the addiction. So I was just so mad. I thought God had forgotten about me, or smited me, or whatever. And it couldn't have been further from the truth. God was always working in my life. I just chose never to see it. If baseball was my purpose and what I was meant to do, then why was I always trying to be somebody different? Right? Why was I always trying to not be myself? And why? So I got an awesome therapy dog who saved my life, and he was born the same month as my tumor was removed. I just celebrated 10 years cancer free, and he just turned 10 years old. And so we do a lot of work at the hospital where God continues to teach me through him, when I help other people. But there's so many, I had to physically see these things, right? I didn't have a burning bush moment, but I had so many things happening to me in my life that I couldn't explain. That was God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And so once I accepted that, like I don't traditionally believe in a religious God, but I believe that God is everywhere and is in everything. That it's just something that I can't understand, and I don't have to understand it. I just have to have faith that it's not me. The inner harmony of the
Yeah.
world, whatever it
Yeah.
may
Have
be.
faith.
I just go ahead. Yeah, it's just, I really believe in there's something greater than me. I'm not the center of the universe, and when I do that, then when I'm closer connected to God, then I'm further away from myself. And the further away from myself, I can more open to other people.
So your relationships, right, with other people had to be rebuilt too. What was the scariest, most important conversation you ever had with someone that you loved?
Yeah, I had to, admitting the heroin and those kind of things, and admitting the brain cancer stuff and the baseball stuff. I think to my dad, I think has been the hardest. We don't realize when we hear stories of a talented athlete who, whether that story is about failure or success, it's hard. It's hard not to focus just on the individual. You don't realize, all the people behind the scenes, right? The weekends that are sacrificed, the resentment of the siblings, or whatever that may be. There's so much more involved into it. It's such a family operation for many people, and I think with the way that things ended for me and my addiction, I think my dad wanted my mom was a little more of a realist, but he wanted to believe that, like that fancy ribbon story I told you earlier, like that's why I became an addict, 'cause my dad wants to believe that, and me having to admit that that's not the truth, I think was hard for him. Because he wants I'm his son, and he wants to have that belief, and I get that. But I think, talking to my college friends, my college teammates, the guys that I grew up with, my brothers, I think having those conversations with them, I did some damage to some of them, and it's all really hard. But I think there's a lot of things that I can't make up for, right? I can't make up for the time, and I can't make up for all these things, but I have to do it every day with my actions and my behaviors, that living amends, right? Showing up and being grateful, and being there. I'm so lucky to be able to have the time with my family. We all moved out here to Ohio, and I'm around them I got to eat dinner at their house 3 times a week. They all got to come to my book signing last night, and I got to share a few words in front of them, in front of strangers that I never shared before. That just
Yeah.
basically and it was a heartfelt moment for me where, they got to hear me talk. I mean, I speak in front of a lot of people. I never get nervous. I mean, I used to pitch in front of thousands of people, where I don't get really nervous, but I was nervous last night, for the first time talking in front of my family. And I got to be up on the stage, but it was such a cool moment, and for me. So yeah, there's not really one thing that's hard. I think admitting all of it's hard. It's still hard, but no, I
So
have
was
to I have
everybody
to
there
live with
last
the.
night for the book signing?
What's that?
Was
Yeah.
everybody there last night for the book signing?
Yeah, we gotta go to dinner afterwards. It's my second signing, so this was the first signing where I was actually speaking at. So we
Okay.
spoke, and then I did a few readings out of the book. The first one they all came to was great too, but they didn't get to hear me speak. So I think that was a powerful moment for me when I got to just share some things, and made that moment not about me, but it was about them, because that's the real tragedy of my story. Yes, my book is about me and all the things that I've overcome, and my story when I speak is all about those things and resilience. But the real tragedy, the real victims of my story are my loved ones that I drug down in the wake of my self-destruction. That's the real tragedy. My friends and family that I hurt. So I want my story is about me, but it's also about everybody else too. It's all about all the people and we think about things like baseball career, like I just mentioned, about other people, and even addiction. Addiction is a family disease, right? And even cancer. So many people are affected in that, not just the individual. And I think that's what I want to emphasize, that it is about me. It's a disease of me, but it's not about me too. It's about all of us that go through, face that, and those hard times, and because we're all going to face them no matter what. How do we confront those inner demons and those battles, and how do we confront our pain and all those kind of things. So that's what it really is about for me.
Yeah. So you've experienced, right, the extremes of sports glory, addiction, hell, and cancer survival. Which one taught you the most about who you really are?
I think, I mean, all of them. Right? That's a hard question, but I think cancer taught me the most about who I was. Right. So cancer taught me cancer taught me how big of an a-hole I am. Right. That's what it really did. Like how selfish and superficial and judgmental I am. And I think that was the most important thing for me to learn, because I remember, after my hair had grown back a little bit, after I put some weight back on, after, I started to look normal about a year after, but I was in so much pain on the inside, the nerve pain all over. I was miserable. I was broken on the inside, but I go out in public, and people treated me like I was normal. And I hated that. I was like, don't you know how much pain I'm in? Don't talk to me. I used to like have these sick thoughts where maybe if I had something physically wrong with me, you could tell how much pain I'm in. I mean, thank God I don't. But yeah, what that really taught me is how much I used to judge a book by the cover, right? How much I used to
Yeah.
Everybody's dealing with an invisible condition that we can't see, and everybody's going through something, right? And just like with pro baseball players, right? Some guys, hey, this guy he's a jerk because he's not signing autographs, but you don't know if he just got off through a divorce. You don't know if he just got through this. I think when you're able to realize that and see people for people, and that's what cancer taught me,
Yeah.
that everybody's going through something. Hey, like maybe he doesn't like didn't sign autographs for you that night because his kid's sick, right? It taught me how to humanize people and not see people as objects like I had done in the past. In addiction, you treat people as objects, helping you to get what you need. But when I'm able to see people for people, it changes my view of the world. Right? It's outside of the disease of me.
Yeah. And in looking back, right? Are you actually grateful for the arm injury, the addiction, and the brain tumor? And how do you reconcile that without sounding crazy?
Yeah, that's good. Well, yeah, I'm extremely grateful because if I continued to play baseball, if I but had a long major league career, I would have been a jerk. I would have been a superficial jerk, and I would have continued to hurt people for even a longer amount of time. And who knows, I'll probably my addiction would have came out in another way, and I probably would have blown up, in a different way. And I'm grateful for the addiction because the addiction taught me how to live life in the moment, right? There's a dichotomy with living life in the moment as an addict, right? Because as an active addiction, you're living moment by moment trying to find this one thing that you need. So everything that you do is you're trying to find this one thing all day, every day, and nothing else matters. But that's the difference between being present is that present you're living the same way day moment by moment, but you're noticing the things that are around you, right? You're noticing those you're there for the people in front of you, right? There's that difference in living versus surviving, right? And I think, if I chase my life and chase the little things that I do in my life the same way that I chase that drug, that I have that ability inside me. I just got to apply it to a different domain, right? I got to apply it. And so that gave me those skills to the creativity and like the mental gymnastics you have to do to, that it takes people skills and people don't realize is that to be able to do this, you have to do all these crazy things to be able to acquire what it takes to acquire a drug like heroin or something, right? It's not that
Yeah.
easy, but you have those skills inside you. You just got to apply them in a more positive way. And then obviously, like I said, with cancer, it humanized me. It humanized other people to me, and in a way taught me compassion and empathy. And I wouldn't have found this new purpose or anything without it. So yes, I am grateful, and I wouldn't change a thing. The only thing that I would want to change is the people that I hurt, right? But everything that
Yeah.
happened to me, the pain, the suffering, I'd do it over again, to be able to be here right now the way that I am.
Yeah. No, we appreciate you coming on. I got two more questions before we go, right? But where can people find the book? Where can people find you on, do you have a website, where they can go purchase the book, or where can they get it and where can they
Yeah.
find you?
Yeah, so my website is www.michaelbugary, which is my whole name.com. And that's you can find you can subscribe to the newsletter, write me a message. I'd love to hear from you, talk to you. That's what this is all about for me. It's just talking and sharing, and you can buy my book from the website. There's some links to click on. It's also available on Amazon. And available in hardcover, paperback, and digital too, the Kindle. So you can get that there, and then obviously on my Facebook or Instagram and things too. You can get a hold of me that way.
It's just your name,
Yep, just my name, michaelbugary.com. Yeah.
where they can find you.
Yeah, and then mbugary on Instagram, and then just my name, and then on TikTok too. I just started TikTok. I'm not good with that yet, but I'll get there. Yeah.
TikTok's a tough one, right?
Yeah.
So if the 3-year-old version of you could sit across from you right now, right? What would you tell that scared, broken kid?
You're good enough. I think you're good enough. I think right, I was always trying to find some external thing to for motivation, but for worth, right? My performance, how many girls I could be with, how many this or physical, whatever outside of myself. I have to find that
Yeah.
self worth from the inside.
Yeah. So for every listener out there right now, right, who feels like their life is over, whether it's injury, addiction, illness, or just crushing depression, what is the one sentence you want them to carry with them after this conversation?
That you're going to be okay. That we all these times are fleeting, and one sense, helping other people helps you. How about that?
Yeah. Helping other people helps you. Michael, brother, I don't even have the words, right? What you shared isn't just a story. It's a lifeline. You took the absolute worst things life can throw at a human being and turned them into proof that no one is ever too far gone. You've showed us that the disease of me can be cured by honesty, by community, by faith, and by choosing to help the next person who's drowning. You prove that pain doesn't get the final word. Gratitude and purpose do. To every single listener who's hurting right now, Michael just handed you the map out of the darkness. You are not alone. Your story is not over. And if this man can lose his dream, lose his health, lose himself to heroin, and still stand here stronger and more alive than ever, then so can you. Michael, thank you for being brutally honest, deeply courageous, and unbelievably inspiring. Your book, The Disease of Me, is going in my hands immediately, and I'm telling every single person I know to read it. Family, if this hits you, share it, tag someone who needs it, and remember, the same power that saved Michael is waiting for you too. We'll see you next week. Stay strong, stay real, and keep fighting. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.